Hi everyone, I am Agata. I am a second year master's student here at Stony Brook, and today I have the great joy of speaking to Gil Kalish, who is a great inspiration to all of us here at Stony Brook and beyond. So Gil, if I started to describe how much you've done for this department, then we'd never finish talking.
Yeah, I
So
think you've said enough already.
So I'll just limit myself to saying that you're really, the heart and soul of the music program here, and you've served as the leading professor and head of performance activities for a number of years, I should say a number of decades. So how did you first come to be at Stony Brook, and how have you seen the music department take shape and evolve over the years?
So I got the. Um, I've been here, um, I think 50 years, maybe 51. I don't remember. So I've been here a very long time. How did I get here? I mean, those are all interesting personal stories. Um, it was a different age in terms of getting positions like this, and I was a freelance pianist in New York, doing a lot of contemporary music. Uh, I had a I had a family of three children, and the life of a freelance performer is not very secure, as is most painfully demonstrated nowadays during COVID, when so much work for musicians has been terminated or cut off, and they're without salaries, without means of support, not able to pursue and live their profession. But anyway, Stony Brook was a very young department, a very young university at the time, and the music department, I think, uh, in their interest in separating themselves from other music departments or important conservatories, and out of conviction too, uh, made an emphasis on contemporary music a kind of hallmark of the department, to separate it from Juilliard or uh, every other basically important music conservatory, in which there was more emphasis on people sitting in their studios practicing their solo work. Sorry for the fire engine, or an ambulance actually, siren. Um, I'm in New York. So they set out to uh, separate themselves ideologically from other more conventional departments by putting an emphasis on new music. They had a very nascent performance department when they began. They had only four faculty. They happened to be four distinguished faculty because the vice president of the school, a man named Sidney Gelber, was a music lover. And uh, so there were four very distinguished people that were hired, but it was a kind of skeleton department in terms of performance. And so little by little, over these first few years, they began to enlarge the department, the performance department, so that they would include the instruments. I mean, at first they had only a cellist, a flutist, a pianist, and a singer. So that's not enough for a substantial department with chamber music, with anything else. It's that, so they little by little enlarged the department, and so I'm not sure how old the university was in 1969. It was founded by Governor Rockefeller at the time, who wanted to model it on the very successful California state system. And so he wanted to say New York should have a system like that, that's as important. So he invented and founded the whole university. So that was probably in the 50s. I think it was definitely in the 50s. So now I'm talking about 10, 12 years later. It was 1969. And it turned out that I had a lot of friends in the department who I performed with often, and even would perform at Stony Brook with them. And so, uh, and as I said, I had three children, young family, and it seemed to me that it would be a natural thing for me to be teaching at a place like this. Now, that's very presumptuous, I would say, at this point, and maybe I would say it even at that point, but because I really had no teaching experience at the college level at all. I mean, I did some teaching, I did, various things around New York and in recitals and with different groups, but I basically was not a person who did systematic organized teaching. So nevertheless, I wrote a letter to the chairman of the department, who was a composer and who I knew just casually from coming back and forth to the department and just living in the music world. And so I wrote to him. His name was Billy Jim Layton, and he was important, middle, youngish composer. He was the chair of the department, and I proposed that he hire me. So that's what I mean when I say presumptuous. And I said, after all, I come to Stony Brook quite a lot. The pianist on the faculty, did not play a lot of new music. So I wound up playing a lot of recitals here. Um, and so I said, the department has been built around the concept of featuring and promoting the music of our time. And that's exactly what I do. So you should hire me. Well, you know, uh, that didn't get me very far, actually, because he answered, sorry to tell you, Gil, but we've just hired Charles Rosen. Charles Rosen was an important pianist, but also a very important writer about music and somebody who lectured about music, somebody of extreme brilliance. Um, and so they had just hired Charles Rosen. And so there's not even a chance, he said, of another position in piano. So lo and behold, a few months later, he calls me up and says, actually, turns out that Charles Rosen doesn't really want to teach piano. He wants to lecture. And so actually there is a position in piano. So um, this was a time before the exhaustive searches that we have now, in which everybody's background is scrutinized meticulously, in which the position is opened up in advertisements to the whole world, in which there was no such thing as, equal opportunity for minority people, the necessity to list the opening and make it known to people of every ethnic background. So it was a more casual process. And basically, I came to the department, I met with the chair. I didn't even have to do a recital or a class. Uh, and then there was another candidate I know who was also a new music player in New York, and he did the same thing, I guess. And basically, the chair asked the department, "Well, who do you think we should hire?" And so they said they should hire me for the most part. So I got hired. So that's how
My
I came.
goodness. Yeah,
And
wow.
and yeah, it's a kind of interesting personal story. But then when I came, I had no students because I was hired late in the spring when everything was already taken. And beside, I was not an experienced teacher with a big teaching reputation. And so I took students who were in the graduate program in musicology or composition or undergraduates. I took whoever came. And it was a very fractional position. It was 1/3 of a line. So it was very few hours. Um, and the department was in its infancy. We taught in a suburban house on Nicole Road. There was no building for us. So we taught in this little suburban house, and we had to very carefully schedule uh, our teaching days at Stony Brook because there wasn't room enough for all of us. So the, my piano colleague and I taught in the garage. And I couldn't come on the day that he was here, and he couldn't come on the day that I was here. So it was a very primitive, just newborn department. And it's, of course, been thrilling to see how it blossomed over these years. So it's probably 60 years old, the whole university. And it wasn't even at Stony Brook at the beginning, but when I got here, it was. So I think that was 1969, the fall of 1969, I believe. And so it's been thrilling to see how it's developed into one of the most important, prestigious music departments in the country. And it has its own niche. It still is a place where we seriously encourage students to investigate new music and even require it. Uh, a lot of other schools now do that too. So, you know, and we have a very serious chamber music program. So in that way, we are here for students who are studying their instrument to be really superb players of their instruments and soloists potentially, but also with the realization that in this world now, it's not enough to be a soloist. There are very few people who are going to make their way in this world as soloists, that you need to be a versatile performer. And more that's the case, especially during, we've realized this during this year when Black Lives Matter has been so prominent, when concerts, in-person concerts at large venues have been impossible, when people have been putting on concerts in intimate spaces, in their homes or in small buildings, with a lot of conversation with audiences. I think our world is forever changed. And, you know, some terrible things like orchestras are not playing. Some of the players are not getting even paid. All of a sudden, everything has disappeared for them. But it's also opened the way for innovation, for imaginative new ways of presenting concerts. And that's, I think, going to be a paramount feature of the future of our art.
Absolutely. And I mean, as you said, the pandemic and just 2020 has brought so many challenges, but also has brought us together in new and maybe more intimate ways. And this semester, our piano studio has been so fortunate because you've been gathering with us every week along with Arthur Haas, and we've been going through Bach's keyboard partitas together. So what has been pushing you towards Bach's music nowadays, and what other kinds of repertoires are you finding yourself exploring?
Well, so first of all, like, you're in California now, I'm in New York. That's how I see you. That's how we do our work together. I have students who are in Korea, and this Zoom, as you know, in some ways annoying as it can be, is also making that possible for everybody to be together. So reason, I'll answer your question also, but a reason for the partita class. Partitas are particular works that Bach wrote, a set of 6 with one additional, so of 7 particular works, is that I was thinking, this is a very difficult time for students, much more difficult than for me. I mean, I have a position, here I am. I have a salary. even though I don't have the opportunity to play concerts now or as much opportunity, uh, I still am doing what I do. And I'm still meeting with my colleagues. We're talking about the future. We're making plans. We're talking about safety. You know, in a way, I'm getting to know my colleagues better than I ever did. So why Bach? Well, a couple of reasons. Uh, first of all, first of all, Bach is like Shakespeare. I mean, Bach is for the ages. It's, you know, we musicians can debate or argue about who's the greatest composer, which is kind of a foolish question, but anyway, we're asked all the time, and there's no answer for that really, because that's very personal. But I don't think there are too many people that would not list Bach among the very, very greatest creators of music in history. Um, so it's music that one never gets tired of, music that's always fresh, and it's also music written 300 years ago and written for different instruments, different idiom, and it's fascinating to try to figure out what did it sound like then. How should we play it now? We're playing it, in this case, on a modern piano. It was not written for a modern piano. Well, how should we do that? And what way should that color our vision of the pieces? So uh, I thought that was a very, kind of salient, important thing for young musicians and old musicians to think about and discuss. Second of all, about this class, the partitas are made up of like five or six separate movements, one could say. They're dance suites, and essentially they're dance-like movements, minuets, gavottes, jigs, things that were danced. Now these pieces were not danced, but they derived from those pieces, those dances. So if you think of seven partitas, there's something like, let's say, 30, 7 times 6, whatever is 42. Okay. Uh, so there are a lot of different movements. I have a lot of people doing this. Everybody gets a chance to play. So there aren't so many kinds of music in which there's so many separate movements, segments in which you could have, all right, somebody plays the overture, somebody plays the jig, somebody plays the saraband. So everybody who's sitting in can participate in that as performers. Then I have in the class my dear harpsichord colleague, Arthur Haas, who's both a scholar and a performer. And so he can address those issues of historical performance practice. What did it sound like? How did musicians read the music then? How did they play what they read? And so, I mean, it's a very rich topic. So, answer to your question, Bach is like, somebody that one never tires of, that is an absolute master. The music is rich. It's also lively. It can be serious. It can be sacred. It can be profane. It can be everything. And it is everything. And so personally, I feel that way also about him. So during this time, I have been, looking through a lot of Bach. It's very satisfying when I can't perform publicly, learning some new pieces, things like that. So that's, as you can see, I can talk too much. But anyway, that's the long answer to your question.
Thank you, Gil. And just out of curiosity, when you're not busy teaching and playing, what do you find yourself doing nowadays?
Nowadays, well, I'm unfortunately a person without a lot of hobbies. So, but one of my obsessions is politics. And so there has been no shortage of things to be interested in and to read about and to uh, worry about than politics in this age. What else have I been doing? I've not ever been a person who did a lot of exercise because for a number of reasons, I guess I don't like to exercise. It never appealed to me. And second of all, I felt I was very busy. To give up an hour of a day for exercise seemed more than I could bear to do. So I'm a slow learner. I had a lot of practicing to do. I had to travel for teaching, had to travel for rehearsals and concerts. I didn't have many days where I was just sitting around. So I've been since March. I had my last concert in March. Um, it was, just the week when everything stopped, March 8th, March 5th and 8th, I had concerts. I went in to teach the days after that. That was it. That was the end. It was that Friday that everything closed down. So I got in my teaching on Tuesday and Wednesday, and literally everything stopped. So that was early March. And I've had the opportunity, I live in New York City on the Upper West Side. Near the Upper West Side are two kind of phenomenal parks, urban parks. One is Riverside Park, which is right near the Hudson River, and the other is the great big and famous Central Park, which is a few blocks from me. So I, for the, I think for the first time, or one of the first times in my life, I could see the seasons. Uh, if you start walking, like let's say March 10th, in New York, the trees are bare. Maybe daffodils are beginning to come out. Certainly not anything else. So it's very spare. And walking down by the river, it's a majestic river, the Hudson River. Um, and so this beautiful walkway, trees are lovely. There, people have, sorry, more fire engines. No, more ambulances, which is a sign of the times too. Uh, People have um, had the opportunity to, well, they've made gardens inside the park. Volunteers have, made little gardens in the park that are exquisite, really exquisite. They're small, but they're so beautiful. And I used to go down, with my wife, we'd go down like one day in April and say, isn't this lovely? And that was it. But if I walked pretty much every day or every other day through March, I saw the change of the seasons. I saw the beginning of the spring. The trees began to green up. The blossoms came out that was so beautiful. And so I've seen the whole progression. Summer, I was up in um, Western Massachusetts, which is a very beautiful area with rolling hills. So the summer passed. I could experience the summer in a way I have never done. And I stayed up in Massachusetts till mid-October and saw the fall, the change of the foliage, uh, which was happening really into November. And the beauty of the colors, the change of the colors, the falling of the leaves. So that was kind of tremendous bonus for me. I'm a very privileged person. I had, as I told you, a salary. I had an income, and I mean, it didn't matter where I was. I taught from Massachusetts. I could teach from New York. It doesn't matter where I am, where my students are. So uh, again, thinking of the students, that was the origin of doing the Bach Partita class. I thought the students are really struggling now, both socially and musically. They can't get into the building even because the building was not well ventilated, and it was not deemed that we should go back to that building, in the spring, and so everything stopped. And same thing in the fall. We've not gone back to the building for the most part. And I felt really that the students were suffering, that, okay, I could give them a lesson and so could all my colleagues, but they couldn't play with other people easily, except on Zoom, because they couldn't be in the same room with other people for the most part, unless they were a married couple or unless they lived in the same apartment or, and they had a bubble. So, but for the most part, that's one of the most precious parts of our program is playing together. I mean, one of the most precious and significant and important and educational parts. They couldn't do that. So how can we enrich the program so that it doesn't feel quite so desolate as it is? I mean, if you have one lesson a week, and what do you do the rest of the week? A lot of my students didn't even have a piano. They had to buy or borrow or be lent a keyboard. It's not the same thing as a piano. They didn't have a real instrument to play on. I mean, they were struggling, and so was everybody else, every other performer. And so a lot of us, we got together. How are we going to make things better? How are we going to give the students more? And so there were a couple of forums that were started. My colleague did a Chopin etude class last semester. I'm doing this Bach class now. Violinist, one of our violin teachers, Jennifer Frauci, is doing all kinds of things with the violinists. They're holding violin class. I mean, we're doing everything that we can to compensate for this desperately difficult time. And so, I mean, we think that it's valuable, and we've learned a lot from it. How do we teach without being present, without being able to demonstrate, without being able to touch the back, the shoulders of the student to show them you're tense? How do we do that? So we have to find words. That's been very challenging. That the only way you can communicate is with words. Well, that's pretty good. And you find better ways of communicating. That's an important aspect of what we do. So, I mean, it's been a revelation in certain ways. And I find that I've been, quite busy. You asked, how do I keep myself busy? Well, I am really busy. They also, this and that, there was a little film that was made about different people. I was one of them. And because the wonderful, brilliant cinematographer and I couldn't be in the same room, I had to do all the photography. And so he had to guide me through that, all these kind of selfies of playing the piano. Where do I put the phone? How do I do that? That was very challenging and tremendous fun also.
And you fooled me because I thought a professional was doing that work. Really.
Well, no, it was all me, and I was very proud of it. Even walking in the park, filming the park, it was all things that I did at his instruction, and then he took it all and edited it, and that's what you see in that particular program. So I did all that filming. That was great.
It's impressive.
Yeah, I was impressed too. So, I mean, there've been plenty of things to do. I've been doing a lot of writing. I like to write, and writing my thoughts, writing about people in my life. We don't have time to contemplate things usually. I have time now to do those things. So again, I'm very privileged to say that, and I realize it. But I am privileged. I'm trying to use the time in a way that's helpful to other people.
Thank you, Gil. I mean, there's so many questions. Maybe just a couple more. I could listen to you for hours and hours. But the pandemic has pushed many young musicians to and not just young musicians, to think about the nature of our art today and our possible contributions to it. You know, how do we weave together new voices, maybe lesser known voices, with more established ones, and also how do we continue, you know, for the people who are just starting their professional journey, how do we continue taking a multifaceted approach to music beyond school, you know, in the real world. And I think your musical trajectory serves as a really powerful reminder that it really is possible to, you know, be a musician in so many ways, and also to bring so many kinds of repertoire together. So what would your, I mean, this time is very, you know, uncertain in many ways, but in the larger scheme of things, what would be your advice to us little people who are just starting off
Well,
professionally?
all right. I truly think that this whole situation with COVID has galvanized us into different kinds of thinking, and even the terrible things that have happened that created the Black Lives Matter movement, the word Black Lives Matter. And there have been just endless discussions about the elitism of what we do. And have we paid attention to society? We can't, or have we existed sort of separately from society and the world? And there is a sense that in some way we have, and that in some way we've separated ourselves. I mean, we are elite in the sense that it takes years and years of work to develop the skills to do what you all do. You don't just come off, you know, casually doing these. It's a study of years and years and years, and so it propels us toward a kind of elitism. On the other hand, it's clear that we are like kind of white, privileged class for the most part. I mean, the history of classical music is, and in this country, is interesting. Like, it wasn't necessarily like that when I grew up, because I'm the child of immigrants, and many people came to this country in the 30s, 40s, you know, as a result of the war, the Second World War in Europe. So a lot of artists came to the country who also were starting out in a way, in a strange culture, a new culture. But okay, so it's clear that we have not brought along the country with us, that classical music is in a kind of crisis, that even some people object to the word classical music as elite. And there are many arguments to be made one way or the other. I would never want to give up the what I consider the great music of the past and present. That may be not the music that is heard frequently on the radio or heard by many people. I mean, particularly young people, and particularly young people of color. It's expensive to take music lessons. It's expensive to have instruments. And so this is not part of the culture of America, and certainly the less privileged part of America. So in some way, we have to be emissaries for this art that we believe in so much. And we also have to open it up. I think that has been happening, and that this has just accelerated, the COVID has accelerated that kind of activity. In other words, until, let's say, well, throughout history, this was a totally male-dominated art, totally. So there have been great women composers who were sidelined, like Mendelssohn's sister, Fanny Mendelssohn, who was basically told, uh, I mean, she and her brother had a beautiful relationship, but he was definitely the public person, and she was encouraged to be a beautiful composer, but that it was not basically her public life. She was a married person, had a family, and so the the brilliant talent of so many women was not even considered. And through the ages, there have been a couple of women that have surmounted that, like Clara Schumann, Schumann's wife, who was a world famous pianist, but her compositions were also underplayed, underknown until now. So that's clearly something that needs to be happening. And even though there have been, a few outstanding, amazing women, um, they've been neglected and they've not developed. Like even Mozart's sister, who he played duets with. I mean, women were not, to be out there. Women were to have families and to support their mates or whoever it was that they were dealing with, whatever male they were dealing with. So Clara was a kind of revolutionary figure, and she was a great, great performer, and she had a career and some recognition. She also had, I don't know how many children, but loads of children, like 9 or so, many of whom died early at that time. Of course, many births didn't result in a long-lived child. So, but all of that while she was touring and composing, she had all those children to deal with. And Robert was he had injured his hand as a player, so he couldn't even play the piano anymore. And he was also mentally a little unstable. She was, in a sense, the breadwinner. And that was very unusual. All right, so our task today, and it's well on its way, is that composers of every kind are encouraged. That also goes for people of color, whose music we have totally neglected, even though it's American music. It is the American music. I mean, where does jazz come from? It comes from people of color. Where does ragtime come from? Think of Scott Joplin. So that music was segregated for so long. Then in the 20s, people like Ravel, like Gershwin, got a taste of our jazz, and it began to infiltrate. But it is American music, and now it's taught at most serious music departments and even at music festivals. And so, but it's also important that people of color are exposed and have the possibility of entering this world of maybe called Eurocentric music that we think is so important and such a great part of culture. I mean, you can say Eurocentric, but we're Americans. And so sometimes people would say, well, you don't know how to play Beethoven, you don't know how to play Schubert, you didn't grow up in those cultures, you have a different culture. It's, in some way we were, not welcomed for a long time until I would say, World War II, when refugees came and saw the promise in America. I mean, we had symphony orchestras well over 100 years ago, but we didn't have American composers of importance, because all American composers thought, well, we have to study the great music of Europe. And so they went to schools where their teachers taught that music. And it was somebody like Charles Ives at the very end of the 19th century, who said, no, we're Americans. We need to have our own music. And his father was a bandmaster. And so he grew up in a different world. He was a very eccentric guy. And he rebelled against this idea that the only good music is European music, and sort of revolutionized things in a way. So little by little, you know, we've entered the mainstream, but we haven't invited our own population to enter this world, nor have we, as supposedly classical musicians, entered their world. And I think we should have, and we should in the future. We don't improvise. Most of us don't play jazz. We're very narrow. So I think that's all going to change. I think that's what we have to do to make this, which is a universal art. Everybody sings in every culture, everywhere. Everybody plays music. I mean, it's part of what the DNA of being a human being is. And so we have to expand our horizons more. So that's what I think and hope will happen and is happening.
Yeah, well, even the Bach Partita class is bringing us to realize that maybe there's less difference between what we think of as this kind of canonical repertoire, how it was performed, back in the day.
That's perfectly true.
Elements of improvisation too. There is a direct dialogue with what other musicians do in jazz and other
perfectly
genres. So,
true.
Yeah. One last question because I cannot resist. So, I guess maybe 12 years ago now, Gil, I went to Music at Menlo, a chamber music festival.
Yes, I remember it well.
For the first time. And I remember this first group meeting where all the, little musicians were...
how old were you? Say how old you were.
I must have been 11 at the time. Yeah, I could barely reach an octave. And I remember your words in that first group meeting. You were saying something like, be a sponge, soak up as much as you can in the next 3 weeks. And most importantly, right before you go on stage, forget everything that you've been told and just play your heart out. And that's just, that advice is so brilliant, and it has stuck. It has been close by all these years ever since. And I'm wondering, is that coming from a personal experience of some sort for you? Did you kind of get there gradually over the years? Do you think about that consciously before you go out to perform?
Well, performing can be a kind of frightening experience. I mean, for really silly reasons of trying to be perfect and trying to not wanting to make a fool of yourself. I mean, I think many performers have this kind of recurring nightmare that soon, the next time you get on stage, everybody will realize what a fraud you are. That kind of, you'll be discovered, because we all know how much we don't know and how much there is to know. So, I mean, it's advice that I could give to myself, and it's hard to take it seriously, but I think it's good advice that we do the best we can to learn and, meticulously to follow the instructions of the composer as best we can, try to be conscientious. But what is the final thing that we want? We want that people feel some emotional connection with what we're doing. They don't care about all these details, nor should they care. They want to hear what is the result of this? Why is this great? I want to feel that greatness. And the more you try to present that you're thinking about the music rather than about yourself and how what a vulnerable position you're in. I think that's really the most constructive way to get out on stage and to present what we consider this really very great part of you being human to other people. You know, that's the best contribution we can make. And if we can do it in that way, we'll be more successful in communicating that. That's sort of what it means to be. And yes, I guess it comes out of my own self-consciousness of being on stage. Oh, I played a wrong note. Isn't that terrible? Or this or that happened. You know, forget about it. There was one a kind of probably, I don't know if that happened before or after. That happened before. When I was working with a very great singer, a very famous and great singer on a very great work. And so we had worked kind of meticulously for a bunch of days. And then, okay, we're ready to do the performance. And so we went, he was a very powerful person in every way. And so we're backstage, and he said to me, so do you remember everything that we discussed? And I said, well, I'll do my best. I'll try. He said, well, forget it all. And then we went out on stage, right at that moment. So, I mean, in a way, that's saying that you've done your work, you've done what you can, you are where you are now, forget it all. So that was a good lesson for me. And I guess that's what I'm saying in a way.
What an experience.
Yeah. It really was.
Yeah, well, Gil, I mean, I'm sure that this advice will continue to resonate because eventually we will get back on stage and
we will.
You know, the world will move onwards. So
yeah.
Thank you so much. Really, this has been such a gift.
And thanks for inviting me.
Other people to hear this as well.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Agata.